Welcome to the History Maps podcast. Let's look at a specific moment in the year 826. If you were a high-ranking Byzantine naval commander at that time, you held immense regional power.
Ah, right, you command a massive fleet.
Exactly. And then out of nowhere, you receive a direct order from the emperor in Constantinople.
Mhm.
But it's not a military directive. It is an instruction to your local governor to have you arrested.
And not just arrested, but, to have your nose surgically sliced off over a local marriage dispute.
Right, which is just wild. But that very real threat of facial mutilation is the specific spark that ignited a 75-year war. So today our mission for this deep dive is to examine the intricate, protracted, and highly consequential Muslim conquest of Sicily.
Yeah, and for you listening, we are definitely bypassing the simplistic narratives of just like a straightforward holy war.
Right, we're looking at a complex web of political opportunism,
Hmm.
intense agricultural innovation, and shifting cultural identities that permanently rewrote the map of the central Mediterranean.
I mean, it's a history characterized by intense strategic calculations and, well, profound unintended consequences. We are dealing with layers of administrative and military decisions that systematically dismantled a centuries-old Byzantine stronghold.
Replaced by an entirely new, highly synthesized society. But to really grasp this, we have to look closely at the architecture of the Mediterranean world at the dawn of the 9th century.
Right, and to understand how this massive shift began, we have to dive into that bizarre triggering event you mentioned. We are looking at a Byzantine general named Euphemius.
Right, he was a tourmarches, which is essentially a senior military commander.
Yeah, and he sparks an absolute international crisis.
But, well, let's talk about what Sicily was actually like before Euphemius decided to turn the world upside down.
Because prior to this moment, Sicily was far from a quiet backwater, right?
Oh, definitely. It was a heavily militarized Byzantine province. Officially, it was designated as the Thema Sicilius.
And it had been under continuous Byzantine control for a long time. Yeah, since 535, right after the campaigns of the general Belisarius. The island was essentially organized as a massive fortress.
I mean, we are talking about an army of approximately 9,600 professional soldiers.
Right, meticulously divided into 4 administrative districts.
9,600 soldiers on one island is just a massive garrison for the period.
It really is. It speaks to exactly how valuable the territory was.
Right. Sicily was a vital economic engine. It was a crucial granary exporting immense quantities of wheat back east.
And it had a robust economy anchored by a bimetallic currency system.
Meaning, they used both gold, palladium, and copper phallus coins in everyday trade.
Exactly. I mean, the island was so central to the empire's stability that earlier, in the 660s, Emperor Constans II actually relocated the imperial court entirely from Constantinople to Syracuse.
Which just highlights the absolute strategic supremacy of the island. Geography dictates destiny here,
Totally. Sicily sits right in the center of the Mediterranean. It effectively controls the sea lanes between Europe and North Africa.
Right, dividing the eastern Mediterranean from the west.
So if you control Sicily, you control the maritime trade and military movement of the entire region.
Which means when Euphemius disrupts this heavily fortified stability in 826, the geopolitical stakes are staggering.
Yeah. So let's get into the disruption itself. Euphemius gets into this marriage dispute.
But the historical accounts of what he actually did are completely split, aren't they?
They are. You have Byzantine chroniclers claiming Euphemius forced a nun to marry him.
Which, that was a severe, highly scandalous violation of both imperial and ecclesiastical law.
Right. But then you have a Latin chronicle, the Chronicon Salernitanum, which provides a much different narrative.
What does that one say?
Well, it claims that a little Greek official, which is likely a derogatory reference to the Byzantine governor, the strategos, actually stole Euphemius's fiancée.
A woman named Hamaniza, right?
Yes. And this governor allegedly did this in exchange for a financial bribe from another aristocratic man.
Okay, so let's unpack this right away. Looking at these two accounts, the stolen bride or stolen nun narrative feels, well, very much like a convenient pretext.
I would agree with that.
We are talking about a deeply ambitious general operating his fleet during a moment of profound imperial weakness. It just feels like he needed an excuse to make a move.
And the broader geopolitical context absolutely supports that interpretation. Euphemius was a political creature,
Right. He knew the Byzantine Empire was highly vulnerable at this exact moment.
Exactly. Emperor Michael II had just spent 3 years fighting a catastrophic civil war against a rebel named Thomas the Slav.
And that conflict just drained the imperial treasury, right? It decimated the military.
Yeah, and furthermore, the empire was simultaneously dealing with the loss of the island of Crete to Andalusian Muslim conquerors.
So the central government in Constantinople was just stretched completely to the breaking point.
Right, but they still try to project authority. Emperor Michael II hears about this marriage scandal, whatever the actual truth of it was.
And he orders the governor of Sicily, Constantine, to arrest Euphemius.
Yes, and this is where the punishment of rhinotomy comes in, the cutting off of the nose.
Right, so explain why that specific gruesome punishment was chosen.
Well, in Byzantine political culture, physical perfection was basically a prerequisite for holding the imperial throne or high office.
Like a reflection of divine order.
Exactly. By ordering Euphemius's nose to be cut off, the emperor wasn't just punishing him physically.
He was permanently, legally disqualifying Euphemius from ever holding power.
Right, or from launching a legitimate rebellion. It was a standard, highly effective method of political neutralization.
But Euphemius predictably did not submit to having his face mutilated.
No, he takes his fleet, sails to Syracuse, and launches a full-scale rebellion.
He actually manages to kill the governor Constantine and briefly seizes the capital.
Yeah, declaring himself emperor. But he lacked the internal support to hold it.
Because another Byzantine commander, a man named Balata, rallied loyalist forces.
Right. Euphemius was quickly defeated in a counterattack.
And he is forced to flee for his life. He leaves Sicily entirely, crossing the Mediterranean to North Africa.
So Euphemius is now sitting in North Africa. He has a few ships. He has ambition, but he has no army.
He needs a way to reclaim his position in Sicily, so he goes knocking on the door of a rising power that happens to be dealing with its own severe internal crises.
Right. He arrives in the region of Ifriqiya, which corresponds roughly to modern-day Tunisia.
And this territory was ruled by the Aghlabid dynasty.
Under the leadership of Emir Ziyadat-Allah I. Now, legally, the Aghlabids were vassals of the massive Abbasid Caliphate based in Baghdad.
But practically, because of the vast distance, they operated with absolute de facto independence.
Exactly. And they were, as you noted, facing a critical, multifaceted internal crisis.
Let's examine that crisis because it really explains everything that happens next.
Well, the Aghlabid military caste, known as the Jund, was essentially tearing itself apart.
There was intense ethnic friction between the Arab settlers who held the elite positions and the Berber troops, right?
Yeah, the Berber troops formed the bulk of the military, and they were experiencing violent mutinies.
And on top of the military fracturing, Emir Ziyadat-Allah I was facing fierce public condemnation from Malikite religious jurists.
Right, the prominent Islamic scholars of the realm. They condemned the emir for living a luxurious, un-Islamic lifestyle.
Like drinking wine and things like that.
Yeah, and more importantly, for his system of taxation.
Because the emir was levying non-Quranic taxes on the Muslim population just to fund his government.
Which the jurists deemed entirely illegal under Islamic law. So the emir's legitimacy was crumbling from both the military and religious sides simultaneously.
And this is the exact moment Euphemius walks into the emir's court and makes a highly calculated offer.
He proposes a formal treaty. Euphemius tells the emir if the Aghlabids provide the military backing to install Euphemius as the independent ruler of Sicily.
That Euphemius will recognize Aghlabid suzerainty and pay them a massive annual tribute.
It is a sweeping proposition, and Ziyadat-Allah accepts it. He sees an opportunity.
So the Aghlabids assemble an expeditionary force, 10,000 infantry, 700 cavalry, and roughly 100 ships.
And on June 17, 827, this force lands at Mazzara del Vallo on the western coast of Sicily.
But the crucial detail here is who the emir chose to lead this army.
Right. He doesn't pick a seasoned, battle-hardened general.
He chooses a man named Asad ibn al-Furat, who is a 70-year-old Islamic jurist and scholar.
Yes, exactly.
Wait, let me stop you there.
Sure.
A 70-year-old scholar,
Yeah.
not a tactician, not a veteran general. That sounds like a recipe for absolute military disaster. What was the emir thinking?
I know, it sounds counterintuitive militarily, but it was actually a stroke of absolute political genius by Ziyadat-Allah.
How so?
By placing the most respected religious scholar in Ifriqiya at the head of the army, the emir framed the invasion not as a secular war of conquest or like a mercenary operation.
Oh.
He explicitly framed it as a jihad, a religious mission to expand the frontiers of the Islamic world.
Oh, I see. So it is basically a domestic public relations move.
Precisely. It achieved two critical domestic goals simultaneously. First, it immediately silenced the Malachite religious critics at court.
Right. They couldn't really criticize the emir when he is funding a holy war led by their own most prominent scholar.
Exactly. And second, it redirected the destructive, restless energy of his mutinous military caste outward.
Because if the Arab and Berber soldiers are busy fighting Byzantines in Sicily, they aren't rebelling and burning down the capital in Kairoun.
Exactly. Euphemius didn't just bring a map of Sicily, he brought a geopolitical pressure release valve for the emir.
That makes so much sense. But if we look at this from Euphemius's perspective, I really can't help but compare his strategy to hiring a mercenary contractor to completely remodel your house.
That is a good way to put it.
You hand him the keys, you show him the blueprints, and then halfway through the project, you realize the contractor fully intends to evict you and keep the property for themselves.
Right. Euphemius thought he was using the Aghlabids to get his throne back, but they were entirely using him.
His illusion of control just evaporated, right?
Almost immediately upon landing. Euphemius provided logistical knowledge in ships, but the Arab commanders quickly marginalized him.
He was no longer a partner, he was just a tool that had served its purpose.
Yeah, and the local Sicilian population viewed him as a traitor, and the Aghlabids viewed him as irrelevant.
So shortly after the invasion began, Euphemius was assassinated by Byzantine loyalists at the fortress of Enna.
While attempting to negotiate its surrender, yeah.
So with Euphemius dead, the pretext is gone. The Aghlabid forces are now facing the stark reality of conquering a heavily fortified, highly organized island entirely on their own.
Right, and this brings us to the agonizingly slow grind of the conquest itself.
Because this was not a sweeping, rapid victory like the early Islamic expansions in the Near East.
Not at all. It was a brutal seesaw conflict characterized by grueling sieges, rampant disease, and constant logistical nightmares.
The initial momentum stalled almost immediately, right?
Yeah. It did. Following the landing in 827, the Aghlabid forces, guided by Asad ibn al-Furat, marched straight for the capital, Syracuse, on the eastern coast.
They laid siege to the city, but the operation ended in complete catastrophe.
Yeah, and not from Byzantine weapons, but from biology. A severe outbreak of plague swept through the Muslim encampment.
And the plague actually kills the commander, the 70-year-old Asad ibn al-Furat, in 828.
Right, the Muslim forces are completely decimated. They suffer such heavy losses that they are forced to burn their own ships to prevent them from falling in Byzantine hands.
They actually had to retreat to inland fortresses just to survive the Byzantine counterattacks.
Yes, and this failure forced a major strategic pivot.
Because they realized Syracuse was far too heavily defended.
And too easily supplied by sea from Constantinople to take from the east. So the Aghlabids hunkered down.
But they received crucial reinforcements from North Africa, right?
Yes, and from Muslim territories in Al-Andalus, modern-day Spain. With these fresh troops, they shifted their focus away from the east coast and concentrated on the northwest of the island.
And in 831, after a grueling year-long siege, they managed to capture the city of Palermo.
Right. Capturing Palermo changes everything. It becomes the new Muslim capital of the island, known as Al-Madinah.
Giving them a permanent, highly fortified beachhead with an excellent natural harbor.
But even with Palermo, the advance remained incredibly slow.
Why did it take so long to conquer the rest of the island? I mean, they had a capital now.
Well, the primary obstacle was the geography of Sicily itself. The interior of the island is incredibly rugged, defined by steep mountain ranges and deep valleys.
And the Byzantines had spent centuries fortifying the high ground.
Exactly. Every small town was a fortified hill settlement. You couldn't simply march an army across a flat plain.
You had to besiege every single mountaintop fortress individually.
Right. And this geography deeply favored the defenders. It took over a decade just to push east and capture Messina in 843.
And the massive central fortress of Enna, located on a sheer plateau in the very center of the island, didn't fall until 859.
Which brings us to the climactic siege of Syracuse, which begins in August 877 and lasts until May 878.
We need to spend some time on this because the details of this 9-month blockade are pretty harrowing.
They are. The Aghlabid forces completely isolate the city by land and sea.
And they're utilizing advanced siege technology, bringing up massive catapults to batter the defenses.
And conducting extensive mining operations to collapse the seaward walls.
Meanwhile, inside the city, the situation deteriorated into severe, catastrophic famine.
Right. The Byzantine garrison and the civilian population were completely cut off from food supplies.
Historical records from the siege document the defenders and citizens boiling and eating animal hinds.
foraging for whatever grass or weeds grew between the paving stones.
and eventually resorting to eating carrion and the bodies of the dead just to survive the winter.
We actually have an eyewitness account from a man named Theodosius the monk who was inside the city and survived the siege.
Right. His writings detail the final collapse of the defenses in May 878.
He describes the sheer terror when the seaward walls finally crumbled and the Aghlabid troops poured in.
He explicitly details a massive slaughter, specifically noting a massacre inside the Church of the Savior.
Where thousands of citizens had fled hoping for sanctuary.
So the city, which had been a jewel of the Mediterranean for over a millennium, was completely devastated.
The fall of Syracuse forces us to ask a critical question. Why was this city, the very heart of Byzantine power in the central Mediterranean, left to fall?
Yeah, because the central administration in Constantinople had 9 months to send a relief fleet.
Exactly. And the analysis points directly to deliberate strategic neglect. Emperor Basil I was the ruler at the time.
And records indicate he was heavily preoccupied with domestic vanity projects.
Specifically, the massive construction of the Nea Ecclesia, the new church, in the imperial capital.
So the Byzantine navy, the very fleet that could have easily broken the Aghlabid blockade of Syracuse,
was engaged in transporting marble and building materials for the emperor's architectural ambitions.
he prioritized building a church over saving his most important western capital.
Yeah, and by the time a relief fleet was finally dispatched, it was far too late. Syracuse had fallen.
Think about the psychological impact of that. When we look at the complete destruction of Syracuse, a city with deep roots in ancient Greek and Roman heritage, and the simultaneous rise of Palermo as a new Arab Islamic administrative center, how did that permanent shift alter the identity of the island?
Well, it was a profound civilizational pivot. The fall of Syracuse broke the psychological, political, and cultural dominance of the Greek-speaking elite that had ruled for centuries.
So the wealth, the administrative talent, and the center of gravity physically moved from the eastern coast to Palermo in the west.
Exactly. The survivors of Syracuse were largely enslaved or fled as refugees to the Italian mainland.
It really marked the definitive end of Sicily as a purely Byzantine space.
From that moment forward, Sicily was firmly established within the cultural, economic, and linguistic sphere of the Islamic West.
You would naturally assume that after taking the capital of Syracuse in 878, the conquest would be effectively over.
Right, the Byzantine command structure was gone.
But instead of mopping up the remaining resistance, the Muslim conquerors suddenly halt their advance. For 2 full decades, the conquest basically stops.
Because instead of fighting the Byzantines, they started fighting a new, very familiar enemy, each other.
Following the fall of Syracuse, the remaining Byzantine holdouts were clustered in the rugged northeastern region of the island, an area known as the Val d'Amone.
And they were essentially given a 20-year reprieve because the Aghlabid forces in Sicily descended into a bitter, complex civil war.
We see that intense ethnic and social friction that started back in North Africa flaring up again.
Yes. On one side of this civil war, you have the Arab elites. They were often the descendants of the earliest conquerors from the 820s.
And they held the most fertile lands, the prime real estate, and the highest administrative posts in Palermo and the coastal cities.
On the other side, you have the Berber soldiers. They made up the vast majority of the infantry, the actual fighting force shedding blood on the frontiers.
Yet they were heavily marginalized.
Right. They received poor land allotments in the rugged interior and faced systemic institutional discrimination from the Arab leadership.
Which, that inequality was structurally unsustainable.
Totally. In 898, this friction finally exploded into open rebellion.
The Berber factions revolted against the Arab elites.
The entire military command structure fractured, with different Berber groups seizing control of various interior regions and agricultural estates.
While the Arab loyalists fortified themselves behind the walls of the urban centers, it is exactly like watching a sports team build an insurmountable lead in a championship game, only to start brawling with their own teammates in the final quarter.
Yeah, just allowing the opponent to linger on the field and survive. The Byzantines in the Val d'Amone survived solely because the Aghlabids were too busy fighting themselves.
That internal conflict really highlights a major systemic vulnerability in the Aghlabid military apparatus.
It really does. Because they required continuous military recruitment from diverse North African tribes to sustain the prolonged Sicilian campaign, they were constantly importing pre-existing social hierarchies, ethnic tensions, and tribal conflicts directly into the Sicilian theater.
So they didn't forge a unified Sicilian identity. They just brought the politics of Ifriqiya across the water.
Exactly, and this severely handicapped their military effectiveness.
The resolution to this chaotic civil war didn't come until the year 902, and it required a heavy hand from the outside.
Yes, we see the arrival of Emir Ibrahim II.
Now, Ibrahim had actually been forced to abdicate his throne in Ifriqiya just prior to this, right?
He had. His methods of rule were so extreme and his purges so violent that the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad had directly intervened and ordered him to step down.
But Ibrahim cleverly channeled his remaining authority and zeal into assembling a massive army for what he declared an armed pilgrimage to Sicily.
And his arrival in Sicily in 902 was brutally decisive. He utilized his unquestioned religious authority and overwhelming military force to violently suppress the Berber rebellion.
He executed dissenting leaders, purged the command structure, and forcibly united the fractured Arab and Berber contingents under his singular command.
Right, and with the army finally reorganized and disciplined, he immediately marched on the last major Byzantine stronghold, the mountaintop city of Taormina.
The siege of Taormina takes place in August 902. Ibrahim II personally commands the assault, and it is a rapid, brutal capture.
The Byzantine defenders suffer heavy casualties, and the survivors are enslaved.
And that capture of Taormina effectively ended the organized Byzantine military presence on the island of Sicily.
While a few isolated, highly remote mountain forts held out a bit longer, the year 902 really marks the completion of the military conquest.
The psychological impact on the Byzantine Empire was severe.
According to the chronicles, when the news of Taormina's fall finally reached Constantinople, Emperor Leo VI was so struck by the finality of the loss that he symbolically removed his crown in mourning.
So, with the military conquest finally complete after 75 agonizing years, the new rulers of Sicily transitioned their focus.
Right. They moved from making war to making money.
And in the process of building an economy, they fundamentally rewrote the physical landscape of the island.
We enter a period of profound economic transformation, often referred to by historians and agronomists as the Islamic Green Revolution.
The Arab and Berber settlers introduced highly advanced hydraulic engineering techniques that they had brought from the arid climates of the Middle East and North Africa. Let's get into the mechanics of this because it is pretty fascinating. We are talking primarily about the qanat, right?
Yes, a qanat is not just a ditch. It is a sophisticated system of underground irrigation channels.
How did that work?
Well, they would dig a mother while tapping into an aquifer at a higher elevation, and then dig a gently sloping underground tunnel to transport that water over long distances directly to agricultural fields.
And because it is underground, it prevents the water from evaporating in the intense Mediterranean sun.
Exactly. They also introduced the naria, which are large mechanized water wheels used to lift water from rivers or lower channels up into elevated aqueducts.
These technologies allowed them to irrigate the land year-round. Think about that shift. The Mediterranean climate is defined by long, incredibly dry, arid summers. Year-round irrigation changed everything.
This continuous, reliable irrigation permitted the introduction of entirely new, exotic crop varieties from the east. Crops that required constant watering and could not survive traditional Mediterranean dry farming.
So the agricultural portfolio of the island expanded dramatically.
Right. They introduced citrus fruits like lemons and bitter oranges, sugarcane, cotton, rice, mulberries for a new silk production industry.
Spinach, eggplant, and highly prized spices like saffron, known in Arabic as za'afaran.
But to grow these specific crops efficiently, they also had to completely change how the land itself was managed.
Right, they moved away from the massive Roman-style grain estates, the latifundia.
Those old estates relied on extensive dry farming of wheat, usually worked by vast numbers of slaves.
Instead, the Islamic administration parceled the land into smaller, intensely cultivated market gardens and orchards. This was managed under the ITA system.
Yes.
Explain how the ITA system worked in practice for the people farming the land.
Well, under the ISA system, the state retained ultimate ownership of the conquered lands. But the rights to the agricultural revenue were leased or granted to military commanders or administrators.
And then these landholders would lease small parcels to tenant farmers.
Exactly. This gave the tenant farmers a direct, tangible financial incentive to maximize the yield of their specific plot.
Because they were growing high-value cash crops rather than just subsistence grain, so the profit margins were significantly higher.
The result was a booming agricultural sector. It fed into a thriving bimetallic economy.
Sicily minted its own gold and silver coins, indicating a highly sophisticated level of commerce.
And they established the island as a vital hub of Mediterranean trade, connecting the markets of Christian Europe, North Africa, and the Near East.
Okay, but I have to push back here a little bit. The phrase green revolution sounds, incredibly positive, like everyone is suddenly wealthy and eating fresh citrus.
I see where you're going with this.
But when we look closer at how this society functioned, we need to clarify the extent to which this prosperity relied on highly coercive systems. We are talking about an agricultural boom built heavily on the forced labor of tens of thousands of enslaved people captured during the decades of sieges,
Right.
combined with the heavy systemic taxation of the local Christian peasantry.
That is a critical distinction, and we must impartially report the realities of the social structure as it existed. This was not an egalitarian economic miracle.
Yep.
The agricultural output was explicitly an export-oriented economy designed to generate immense tax revenue and extract agricultural tribute, particularly grain and cash crops to be sent back to the capital in North Africa.
So the prosperity of the ruling Muslim class in Palermo was directly predicated on the fiscal extraction and physical labor of the subjugated local population.
Yes. And managing that subjugated population, which even after the conquest was still overwhelmingly Christian, required a very specific legal and social framework.
Because you can't have a minority ruling elite extracting wealth from a majority population without a system to keep them in line.
Right. The Islamic administration applied the dhimmi status to the Christian and Jewish populations of Sicily. This was a well-established legal designation rooted in Islamic jurisprudence.
It granted these people of the book the right to retain their property, freely practice their religion, and maintain a degree of internal administrative autonomy.
Provided they submitted to Muslim political authority and, most importantly, paid specific taxes.
Let's break down those taxes. The primary financial mechanism was the jizya. This was a poll tax, essentially a head tax, levied on all able-bodied, non-Muslim adult males.
Records suggest this ranged from 1 to 4 gold dinars annually, scaled depending on the individual's wealth.
So if you were a wealthy merchant, you paid more. If you were a poor farmer, you paid less, but you still paid.
There was also the kharaj, which was a distinct land tax assessed on the agricultural properties owned by non-Muslims.
Think about it from the perspective of a local farmer. A portion of your crop and a portion of your hard currency went directly to the emir.
And beyond the heavy taxation, the dhimmi framework imposed specific, visible societal rules designed to reinforce the social hierarchy.
Like what?
Well, Christians were generally prohibited from building new churches or expanding existing ones without explicit state permission, which was rarely granted.
They were strictly forbidden from bearing arms or riding horses in certain contexts.
And proselytizing to Muslims was strictly outlawed and carried severe penalties.
The severity of these rules and the level of property confiscation often depended on how a specific Sicilian town had originally been conquered during that 75-year war.
Right, the administrative records distinguish between su, which meant a town had recognized the inevitable and surrendered peacefully.
Meaning they negotiated a treaty that preserved many of their lands and rights.
On the other hand, you had anwa, which meant the town resisted and was conquered by force, like Syracuse or Taormina.
And anwa status resulted in significantly harsher terms: mass confiscation of agricultural lands and often widespread enslavement of the inhabitants.
Alongside these legal and fiscal frameworks, there was a profound linguistic and cultural shift. Arabic rapidly replaced Greek and Latin as the language of administration, high commerce, and the law courts.
So if a Christian farmer wanted to engage with the state, dispute a property line, or conduct significant trade in the markets of Palermo, they had to do so in Arabic.
Yet, despite these heavy restrictions, the taxation and the linguistic shift, historians often describe this period as a state of subordinate prosperity.
Which brings up a question: how did the Aghlabids manage to extract so much wealth without triggering massive, continuous peasant uprisings across the island? Why didn't the majority Christian population just revolt against the minority rulers?
It really came down to sheer administrative pragmatism. The Aghlabids did not destroy the existing Byzantine tax registers, which were known as the defeteria.
They simply translated them into Arabic and adapted them to the new Islamic fiscal system.
While the tax burden under the jizya and kharaj was undoubtedly heavy, historians note that the system was highly structured and, most importantly, predictable.
Right. Think about how you pay your property taxes today. You know exactly what is owed and when. Now imagine the late Byzantine system, which had become incredibly erratic.
Relying on sudden, predatory exactions whenever the emperor needed to fund a war.
When the Aghlabids introduced a predictable, transparent tax system, you can imagine why the local farmers, while subordinated, found a level of stability that allowed the agrarian economy to function without pushing them into open revolt.
Exactly. Predictability breeds stability. However, this raises an important question regarding the ultimate goal of the conquest.
How the Muslim conquerors balanced the ideological desire to spread their religion with the stark economic reality of the dhimmi system.
Yes, because every time a Christian converted to Islam, they were legally no longer required to pay the jizya. Every conversion meant a direct, permanent loss of tax revenue for the state.
It is a fascinating tension within the administration. They are ostensibly there on a holy war, but they need the tax money of the non-believers to fund the state.
And the administration clearly prioritized fiscal stability and agricultural output over achieving total religious homogeneity.
While Islamization certainly did occur, often driven by Christians converting precisely to escape the financial burden of the jizya or to gain social mobility, the state did not mandate mass force conversions.
They preferred a reliable taxpayer over a new convert.
This delicate, highly calculated balance of predictable taxation, intense agricultural innovation, and religious subordination laid the absolute groundwork for Sicily to reach its zenith.
But it wouldn't be under the Aghlabids. A massive geopolitical shift was about to occur that would push Sicily into its golden age.
Right, the geopolitics of the Mediterranean shift again. In the year 909, the Aghlabid dynasty in North Africa was violently overthrown by the Fatimid Caliphate.
The Fatimids were a powerful, expanding Shia dynasty. Initially, they treated Sicily merely as a military outpost, a launching pad for raids into Italy.
However, in 969, the Fatimids made a monumental strategic decision. They moved their capital far to the east, conquering Egypt and establishing the city of Cairo.
When the Fatimids moved the center of their empire to Cairo, they simply could not micromanage an island as complex as Sicily from that distance. So they left the administration of the island in the hands of a trusted local dynasty, the Chalbids.
This transition actually started a bit earlier when Hassan al-Qalbi was appointed governor in 948, but with the Fatimids permanently settled in Egypt, the Chalbids gained immense, unprecedented autonomy.
This initiates the Chalbid Emirate, which is widely considered the golden age of Islamic Sicily, lasting roughly from 948 to 1053.
The economic and demographic growth during this period was absolutely staggering.
It really was. The capital city of Palermo swelled to a population of over 300,000 people.
To put that in context, that made it one of the largest, most densely populated, and most prosperous cities in all of Europe at the time.
The wealth generation was extraordinary. Records report that the island was generating state revenues of 1 million gold dinars annually.
But the Chalbid era wasn't just about raw economic power, right? It was a profound intellectual and multicultural peak.
Exactly. Because the society was so wealthy, it attracted scholars, poets, and scientists. We see a highly integrated society where Christian medical scholars, like a prominent figure named Al-Ghassani, were teaching medicine, pharmacology, and even Islamic religious law in Sicily.
They were utilizing and translating the texts of renowned physicians from Baghdad and the wider Islamic world.
Furthermore, the state bureaucracy was deeply reliant on bilingual Christian scribes and administrators.
These individuals were essential intermediaries. They managed the complex taxation and legal affairs, translating between the Arabic-speaking Muslim elites in the cities and the Greek or Latin-speaking Christian peasantry in the countryside.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Chalbids displayed incredible, pragmatic governance. Think about the political tightrope they were walking.
Right. Their ultimate overlords, the Fatimid caliphs in Cairo, were Shia Muslims.
But the vast majority of the Muslim settlers and soldiers in Sicily, the Arabs and Berbers, were Sunni. And the rural population producing the wealth was Christian.
The Chalbids managed to maintain loyalty across all these disparate groups through sheer economic success and by deliberately not enforcing strict Shia religious dogma from Tyro.
They understood that their power rested entirely on economic self-sufficiency and maintaining the delicate social balance established over the previous century.
As long as the island was prosperous, the taxes were collected, and the people weren't rebelling, they could operate with almost total independence from the Fatimids.
Exactly.
It is remarkably similar to a corporate startup. Imagine a startup that struggles under the heavy, micromanaging hand of a demanding parent company.
Harsh.
But once that parent company relocates its headquarters halfway across the world to focus on other markets, the local managers are finally allowed to run things their own way. They know the local market, they implement their own systems, and the company suddenly becomes wildly profitable.
That is a great comparison. The Chalbids were those local managers, and they turned Sicily into an absolute Mediterranean powerhouse.
Unfortunately, that extreme autonomy eventually led to their downfall. By the 1030s, the Chalbid dynasty began to fracture due to severe dynastic infighting over succession.
Without a strong central authority to mediate disputes, the centralized emirate collapsed. The island splintered into smaller, fiercely warring fiefdoms ruled by local warlords.
This period is known as the Taifa era, and this internal fracturing left the island incredibly vulnerable. They had the wealth, but they no longer had the unified military structure to defend it.
And that vulnerability would soon be exploited by the next wave of conquerors looking to seize the riches of the Mediterranean.
But as we wrap up this deep dive into the historical records, there is a final, vital point we need to consider regarding the legacy of this 75-year Muslim conquest and the incredibly complex society it built.
Right. When the Norman knights from mainland Italy, led by ambitious figures like Roger I, eventually invaded and conquered Sicily between 1061 and 1091, they encountered a society that was vastly more sophisticated than their own.
Both in terms of bureaucratic administration and agricultural technology. And this is the provocative thought I want to leave you with today. The Normans, who were Christian crusaders, conquered Muslim Sicily. But they didn't destroy the Islamic administration.
No, they didn't burn the Arabic tax registers, they didn't dismantle the Ikada land management system, and they didn't smash the Connaught irrigation networks.
Instead, they recognized the genius of the system and absorbed it entirely.
The complex, multicultural system of bilingual Christian scribes, the mechanics of the jizya taxation, and the advanced hydraulic agriculture pioneered by the Aghlabids and Chalbids became the direct blueprint for the Norman Kingdom of Sicily.
The Muslims built an incredible economic and administrative engine, and the Normans simply took the wheel, creating one of the most uniquely synthesized, wealthy, and powerful states in all of medieval Europe.
It demonstrates that the most enduring legacy of the Muslim conquest of Sicily was not just military victory or religious expansion, but the creation of an administrative and economic framework so effective, so deeply rooted in the landscape, that even their eventual conquerors relied upon it to rule.
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.